The lecture hall buzzed with the usual morning chatter as students filed into Advanced Galactic Military Strategy. Professor Zethkar's 4 eyes swept across the mixed crowd of species from across the Terran Federation. Catherian nobles with their crystal blue skin sat next to hulking Gromax warriors, while delicate Velani floated in their containment suits alongside sturdy human cadets. In the back corner, almost invisible among the shadows, sat Sarah Chen. Her dark hair fell like a curtain across her face as she hunched over her tablet, fingers moving silently across the surface. She had claimed the same seat on the first day of term at the Proxima Military Academy, and nobody had bothered to challenge her for it since. "Cadet Velthara," Professor Zethkar's voice cracked like a whip across the hall. "Explain the standard formation for a 3-fleet engagement against superior numbers." The tall Catherian stood gracefully, her melodious voice filling the space as she detailed textbook tactics with practiced ease. Other students nodded approvingly. Velthara had never given a wrong answer, never stumbled over complex strategic theory. Sarah's stylus paused for just a moment before continuing its quiet dance across her screen. "Excellent as always," the professor rumbled. "Now who can tell me the weakness in that formation when facing an enemy with quantum displacement capabilities?" Hands shot up around the room. Gromax Cadet Thok's massive arm nearly blocked out the ceiling lights. The professor's gaze swept past Sarah's corner without pause, as if she weren't there at all. "Cadet Rodriguez?" The human cadet stood confidently. "The quantum displacement would allow them to materialize within our formation's weak point, at coordinate 77 Mark 4, sir. Standard counter would be to deploy screening vessels in a diamond pattern." "Partially correct. Anyone else?" More hands raised. Sarah kept writing, her expression unchanged as the discussion flowed around her like water around a stone. She had attended every class for 8 months now, never missed an assignment, never caused trouble. She also never volunteered answers, never joined study groups, never spoke unless directly addressed. When Professor Zethkar did call on her, which happened perhaps once every few weeks, she would stand quietly and give brief, correct answers in a voice barely above a whisper. Then she would sit down and disappear back into her corner. "The problem with Rodriguez's answer," Professor Zethkar continued, "is that it assumes the enemy will follow conventional displacement patterns. A truly innovative commander might use quantum tunneling to bypass the screening vessels entirely." After class, students clustered in the hallways, debating strategy and comparing notes. Velthara held court near the main entrance, her crystalline laugh ringing out as she corrected someone's understanding of orbital mechanics. Thok and his Gromax friends discussed the upcoming combat simulations with eager anticipation. Sarah packed her things slowly, waiting for the crowd to thin before making her way to the door. She had almost reached the exit when a voice stopped her. "Chen." She turned to find Marcus Webb, one of the top human cadets, flanked by 2 of his friends. Marcus had the kind of easy confidence that came from never being told he couldn't do something. His test scores placed him in the top 5% of their class. "We're putting together a study group for the tactical assessment next week," he said, his tone suggesting this was a generous offer. "You could join if you want. Might help bring your participation grade up." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes unreadable. Around them, other students had slowed their conversations, curious about this rare interaction with the Academy's most invisible cadet. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll manage on my own." Marcus shrugged, already turning away. "Your choice. Don't say we didn't offer." As the group walked off, Sarah caught fragments of their conversation. Don't know why she even bothers. Barely speaks above a whisper. Probably. Wash out before graduation. Sarah continued to her dormitory, a small single room she had requested specifically. While other cadets gathered in common areas or visited each other's quarters, she spent her evenings alone with her studies and her thoughts. What none of them knew was that Sarah Chen had already graduated from 3 different military academies on Earth. She held advanced degrees in xenobiology, quantum physics, and psychological warfare. She had been personally recruited by Admiral Harrison himself, though the details of that recruitment were buried so deep in classified files that even Professor Zethkar lacked the clearance to access them. The Proxima Academy represented something different for her. It wasn't about learning. She could teach most of these classes herself. It was about observation, about understanding how the various species of the Federation thought, how they fought, how they could be defeated. Because while the Federation celebrated its diversity and cooperation, there were whispers in the deepest levels of human military intelligence, whispers about species that smiled while plotting, about alliances that might not survive the first real test of strength, about the possibility that humanity might one day stand alone against enemies both without and within. Sarah's tablet chimed softly. A message from Admiral Harrison, encrypted and brief. Progress report required. How proceed the studies? She typed her reply with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything else. Observation phase continues. Subjects unaware of true nature of examination will be ready when called upon. Outside her window, the twin suns of Proxima Centauri set behind the Academy's spires, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Tomorrow would bring another day of classes. Another day of being overlooked and underestimated. Tomorrow, other students would continue to see a shy, unremarkable human girl who barely spoke above a whisper. They had no idea they were sitting next to one of humanity's most dangerous weapons. In the distance, a training alarm echoed across the Academy grounds, a routine drill that sent cadets scrambling to their assigned positions. Sarah listened to the sound with professional interest, noting response times and coordination patterns. Soon enough, she thought, the alarms would be real. And when that day came, silence would give way to something far more devastating. The quiet ones, after all, were always the most dangerous. The combat simulation bay hummed with energy as fourth-year cadets prepared for their final practical examination. Holographic displays showed a three-dimensional battlefield stretching across several light years, complete with asteroid fields, nebulae, and gravitational anomalies that could crush unwary ships. "Listen up," barked Commander Torres, the Academy's chief tactical instructor. "This simulation is based on actual battle data from the Kepler incident. You'll be commanding Federation forces against an unknown enemy fleet. Victory conditions are simple. Protect the civilian evacuation convoy and neutralize the threat." Sarah stood with the other cadets, her expression as neutral as always. Around her, excited whispers passed between friends as they speculated about ship assignments and battle strategies. Felthara was already discussing formation theories with her usual crowd of admirers. "Cadet teams will be assigned randomly," Commander Torres continued, manipulating a holographic roster. "Team Alpha, Felthara, Rodriguez, Thok, and..." His finger paused over the list. "Chen." A few snickers rippled through the crowd. Marcus Webb shot a sympathetic look at Velthera, who maintained her composure despite the obvious disappointment that flickered across her crystalline features. "Great," muttered Rodriguez under his breath. "We get the mute." Team Beta formed around Marcus Webb, gathering some of the Academy's top performers. Team Gamma included several aggressive Gromax cadets known for their direct approach to combat. Team Delta rounded out with a mix of species that had worked together before. "You have 30 minutes to plan before the simulation begins," Torres announced. "Remember, this counts for 40% of your final grade. Don't waste it." Team Alpha gathered around a planning table while holographic displays showed their assigned fleet. 3 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, 12 frigates, and a carrier with 2 fighter squadrons. A respectable force, but nothing exceptional. "Standard defensive formation," Velthara began, her musical voice taking command naturally. "Rodriguez, you'll take the destroyers and screen our flanks. Thok, position your fighters for reconnaissance and harassment. I'll coordinate the main battle line with the cruisers and..." "What about Chen?" Rodriguez interrupted, nodding towards Sarah, who had remained silent while studying the fleet composition data. Velthara glanced at Sarah with barely concealed irritation. "Chen can observe, take notes on our performance for the after-action review." Sarah looked up from her tablet for the first time since they had started planning. "What do we know about the enemy?" "Unknown force composition," Velthara replied curtly. "Standard doctrine suggests..." "No," Sarah said quietly. "What do we actually know?" "The simulation is based on the Kepler incident." "What happened at Kepler?" Rodriguez frowned. "That's classified above our level. We're supposed to work with the information provided." Sarah's dark eyes moved between her teammates. Admiral Crenshaw commanded Federation forces. 3 battle groups, standard formation. They were wiped out in 47 minutes. The enemy used quantum tunneling technology to appear inside our defensive perimeter. Thok's massive frame shifted uncomfortably. How do you know classified battle data? I read, Sarah replied simply. The energy signatures detected at Kepler matched theoretical projections for Zathek weapon systems. Belthara's blue skin darkened with annoyance. The Zathek are Federation allies. They've been for over 2 decades. Yes, Sarah agreed. They have been. Something in her tone made the others pause. Rodriguez leaned forward. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we prepare for an enemy that can quantum tunnel, uses energy weapons with crystal matrix amplifiers, and employs hive mind tactical coordination, Sarah said. And I'm suggesting we don't use standard Federation tactics, because standard Federation tactics got Admiral Crenshaw killed. Belthara's crystalline features hardened. You're out of line, Chen. We're using proven strategies. Proven to fail, Sarah interrupted, her voice still quiet but carrying an edge that made everyone step back. Would you like to fail this simulation using textbook tactics? Or would you like to win using something the enemy won't expect? For a moment, the planning area fell silent except for the hum of holographic displays. Then Thok spoke up, his rumbling voice thoughtful. What do you have in mind? Sarah's fingers danced across her tablet, calling up tactical displays that made the others stare. Instead of the standard defensive formations they had all memorized, she showed something completely different. We split the fleet, she began. Make it look like we're following standard doctrine, but hide our real strength. The enemy will tunnel inside our perimeter expecting to find our main battle line. Instead, they'll find decoys in a trap. That's suicide, Rodriguez protested. Dividing forces in the face of superior enemies violates every principle of space combat. Every Federation principle, Sarah corrected. But the enemy isn't Federation. They think like a hive mind. They expect us to mass our forces for maximum firepower. When they tunnel through, they'll be looking for our strongest concentration. She manipulated the display, showing how the fleet could be repositioned. Skeleton crews on the heavy cruisers, running full sensor signatures to mask the deception. Our real firepower gets distributed among the frigates and fighters, positioned here, here, and here. Belthara studied the formation despite herself. The cruisers would be defenseless if the plan fails. The cruisers are already dead if we use standard tactics, Sarah replied. This way, when the enemy tunnels into what they think is our main formation, they find themselves surrounded by ships they discounted as screening vessels. It's insane, Rodriguez muttered, but he was studying the tactical projections with growing interest. It's human, Thok said unexpectedly. His deep voice carried a note of respect. Gromax honor our enemies by meeting them with strength. Humans honor their enemies by being unpredictable. The planning time ended before they could reach a consensus. As they moved to their command stations, Belthara made the final decision. We'll try Chen's plan, she announced, surprising everyone, including Sarah. But if this fails, it's on all of us. Sarah took her assigned position at the communications console, a role typically given to junior officers or, in this case, unwanted team members. Around her, the simulation bay filled with the controlled chaos of a fleet preparing for battle. On the main display, enemy contacts began appearing at the edge of sensor range. Hundreds of ships moving in perfect formation with mathematical precision that spoke of hive mind coordination. Contact, Rodriguez called out from the sensor station. Multiple enemy squadrons bearing Mark 77. Energy signatures match. He paused, double-checking his readings. They matched theoretical Zathek configurations. Belthara's face went pale beneath her crystal blue skin. She looked at Sarah with new eyes, finally understanding that the quiet girl in the corner had been several steps ahead of all of them. All ships, Belthara commanded, her voice steady despite the revelation. Implement Formation Delta 7. Execute Chen Protocol. As their fleet began the carefully choreographed dance that would either save them or destroy them, Sarah allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The real test was about to begin. The enemy fleet approached with mechanical precision that sent chills through the simulation bay. Each ship maintained perfect formation spacing, their movements synchronized to a degree that no collection of individual pilots could achieve. This was hive mind coordination at its most terrifying. Enemy fleet composition confirmed, Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with tension. 437 vessels, heavy battleships, cruiser squadrons, and something else. The computer can't classify the larger vessels. On the tactical display, massive shapes moved among the conventional warships, structures so large they dwarfed even Federation dreadnoughts. Their energy signatures pulsed with unfamiliar patterns. Hive ships, Sarah said quietly from her communication station. Their mobile command centers and manufacturing facilities combined. Each one can coordinate up to 1,000 individual vessels and produce replacement fighters during battle. Velthera spun around. How could you possibly know that? Because I've seen the classified reports from Deep Space Reconnaissance, Sarah replied, her fingers continuing their work at the communications panel. The Federation has been tracking these vessels for 3 years. They're not in any Academy textbook yet. Thok rumbled uneasily from his fighter coordination station. If they can manufacture ships during battle, how do we win? We don't fight the hive ships, Sarah said. We make them fight each other. Before anyone could ask what she meant, the enemy fleet began its attack run. The larger vessels hung back while faster cruisers and destroyers accelerated toward the Federation position. Their approach vector was textbook perfect, designed to maximize firepower while minimizing exposure to defensive weapons. They're going for a standard penetration attack, Rodriguez observed. Concentrate force at our weakest point and break through our formation. Let them come, Velthera ordered, though her voice betrayed her nervousness. All ships maintain formation Delta 7. Make them believe we're following standard defensive doctrine. The Federation heavy cruisers sat in the center of their formation like bait, their massive hulks broadcasting full sensor signatures. To the approaching enemy, they would appear to contain the bulk of the Federation's firepower and crew. What the sensors couldn't detect were the skeleton crews actually aboard those ships, and the fact that most of their weapons had been powered down. Meanwhile, the real strength of the Federation fleet lay scattered among the seemingly unimportant frigates and fighters positioned throughout the formation. Sarah's plan had distributed their firepower across dozens of smaller vessels that would appear insignificant to an enemy focused on eliminating the largest threats. First enemy fleet at weapons range, Rodriguez announced. They're charging primary systems. Energy buildup indicates quantum tunneling in 30 seconds. All units stand by, Velthera commanded. Around the simulation bay, cadets from the other teams watched their displays with growing excitement. Team Beta had already engaged their simulated enemy and was locked in a traditional slugging match. Team Gamma had lost 2 ships to an aggressive charge that had failed to break enemy lines. Quantum signatures detected, Rodriguez called out. They're tunneling! Now! Space twisted as the enemy fleet employed their most devastating tactic. Ships simply vanished from their positions at the edge of the system and reappeared directly inside the Federation formation. It was like watching magic, if magic could reduce starships to expanding clouds of plasma. But instead of appearing behind helpless cruisers loaded with crew and weapons, the enemy found themselves surrounded by what they had dismissed as unimportant escort vessels. Sarah's frigates had been positioned with careful precision, and now they opened fire from point-blank range. All frigates, execute Omega Strike, Velthera ordered, finally understanding the full scope of Sarah's plan. The smaller Federation ships unleashed coordinated volleys that had been carefully calculated to overwhelm enemy shields. Beam weapons, missiles, and kinetic projectiles converged on enemy vessels that had expected to be attacking, not defending. 3 enemy cruisers died in the first 10 seconds. Direct hit on enemy flagship. Thok roared with satisfaction as his fighters swarmed around a massive enemy battleship. Their quantum tunnel systems are offline. The enemy fleet, caught completely off guard, tried to adapt. Their hive-mind coordination should have given them an advantage in rapidly changing tactical situations. But Sarah had counted on one crucial weakness in hive-mind thinking. They excelled at executing perfect plans, but struggled when those plans failed catastrophically. Enemy fleet is breaking formation, Rodriguez reported with amazement. They're actually retreating. No, Sarah said sharply. They're regrouping. The hive ships are recalculating. We have maybe 2 minutes before they adapt to our tactics. Velthera looked at her teammate with new respect. What do we do? Phase 2, Sarah replied, her fingers flying over the communications console. We make them fight their own ships. What happened next would be studied in advanced tactical courses for decades to come. Sarah had done something that should have been impossible. She had hacked into the enemy communication network during the chaos of battle and begun feeding false coordinates to individual enemy squadrons. The hive mind relied on perfect information, flow to coordinate hundreds of ships. When that information became corrupted, the results were devastating. Enemy vessels began targeting each other, each squadron convinced that their neighbors had been compromised by Federation infiltrators. How is this possible? Velthera whispered as they watched enemy battleships turn their weapons on former allies. Zathek communication protocols use quantum entanglement for instantaneous coordination, Sarah explained while continuing her electronic warfare. But quantum entanglement can be spoofed if you know the right frequencies. I learned that from studying their own technical manuals. The enemy fleet tore itself apart in minutes. Ships that had moments before moved in perfect harmony now fired on each other with desperate fury. The massive hive ships tried to restore order, but Sarah's virus had infected their coordination networks too deeply. When the simulation ended, the tactical display showed complete Federation victory with minimal losses. Around the bay, other teams stared in stunned silence at what Team Alpha had accomplished. Commander Torres stepped forward, his weathered face showing a mixture of amazement and concern. "Cadet Chen," he said slowly, "please explain how you accessed classified intelligence reports and Zathek technical specifications." Sarah stood at attention, her expression returning to its usual neutral mask. "I read extensively, sir. Information wants to be free if you know where to look. That's not an answer, Cadet. It's the only answer I can give at this security level, sir." The simulation bay fell completely silent. Even the background hum of holographic projectors seemed muted. Commander Torres studied Sarah for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Team Alpha receives full marks for tactical innovation and mission success," he announced. "However, Cadet Chen will report to Admiral Harrison's office immediately following debriefing." As the other cadets filed out, discussing the incredible battle they had just witnessed, Sarah remained behind. Velthera approached her hesitantly. "Why didn't you ever speak up before?" the Catherian asked. "You could have been leading tactical discussions, teaching the rest of us." Sarah looked at her teammate with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Because observation requires silence," she said quietly. "And I needed to observe all of you." The implications of that statement would keep Velthera awake for days to come. As Sarah left to meet with Admiral Harrison, she passed groups of cadets who looked at her with new eyes. The quiet girl from the back corner had just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded most of their instructors. But more importantly, she had revealed that someone had been watching them all along, studying their strengths and weaknesses with the patience of a predator. The question now was, what else had she learned during her months of observation? Admiral Harrison's office occupied the top floor of the Academy's command tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the training grounds below. Sarah stood at attention before the massive desk, her expression calm despite the weight of the moment. The Admiral was not alone. 3 other figures sat in the shadows beyond the desk's reach. A woman in the dark uniform of Federation intelligence, a man whose insignia marked him as a senior diplomatic official, and someone whose face remained hidden beneath a privacy hood. "At ease," Lieutenant Admiral Harrison said. Sarah blinked. It was the first time anyone at the Academy had used her real rank. "Your performance in today's simulation has raised some questions," the Admiral continued. "Questions that we perhaps should have addressed sooner." The intelligence officer leaned forward, her sharp features catching the light. "How long have you known about the Zathek infiltration protocols?" "Since the Kepler incident analysis was completed," Sarah replied. "The quantum signatures were conclusive. Zathek weapons technology was used against Federation forces. That analysis is classified at the highest levels," the diplomat interjected. "It hasn't even been shared with the Federation Council yet." Sarah remained silent, waiting. Admiral Harrison sighed. "Show them, Lieutenant." Sarah reached into her jacket and withdrew a small device that looked like an ordinary data pad. But when she activated it, holographic displays filled the room with intelligence reports, communication intercepts, and tactical analyses that painted a disturbing picture. "For the past 18 months, Sarah began, her quiet voice carrying new authority, Zathek forces have been conducting training exercises near strategic Federation worlds. These exercises have allowed them to map our defensive positions, study our fleet movements, and identify key infrastructure targets." The holographic display shifted to show star charts with red indicators marking Zathek fleet positions. There were dozens of them, positioned throughout Federation space under the guise of joint military cooperation. 3 weeks ago, intercepted communications confirmed what we suspected, Sarah continued. The Zathek Collective has signed a mutual defense pact with the Vorthon Empire. When the Vorthons begin their expansion into Federation territory, the Zathek will support them by eliminating Federation forces from behind our own lines. The hidden figure spoke for the first time, their voice electronically modulated. What is the timeline for this betrayal? Unknown, Sarah admitted. But recent Zathek fleet movements suggest preparation for large-scale operations. They're massing forces near key Federation shipyards and supply depots. The intelligence officer activated her own display, showing surveillance footage from various Federation worlds. We've confirmed unusual activity at 17 different Zathek diplomatic facilities. They're evacuating non-essential personnel and hardening their installations. How long before they're ready to strike? Admiral Harrison asked. Based on logistical requirements and current force disposition, Sarah calculated, somewhere between 6 weeks and 3 months. They're waiting for the Vorthons to make the first move. The diplomat shifted uncomfortably. The Federation Council will never believe this without absolute proof. The Zathek have been our allies for over 20 years. Their trade agreements alone are worth trillions of credits annually. Which is exactly why they're the perfect choice for a betrayal, the modulated voice observed. No one suspects the friend who stands to profit from your destruction. Admiral Harrison stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the academy grounds where cadets from dozens of species train together in the spirit of Federation cooperation. How many other species are compromised? Unknown, Sarah replied. The Zathek communications were encrypted, but they referenced other arrangements and additional assets. At minimum, we should assume that several Federation Council members are working against us. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Federation had been built on the principle that diverse species could work together for mutual benefit. The idea that some of those species might be planning humanity's destruction struck at the very foundation of their civilization. What do you recommend, Lieutenant? The Admiral asked. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her dark eyes. We prepare for war, sir. Not the kind of war the Federation has fought before, a polite conflict with rules and honor. We prepare for the kind of war that humanity fought before we reached the stars. Explain. The Federation's military doctrine assumes that all member species share certain values. Protection of civilians, proportional response, respect for surrender, Sarah said. These assumptions make us predictable. Our enemies are counting on us to fight according to Federation rules while they ignore those same rules entirely. She manipulated the holographic display, showing theoretical battle scenarios. When the Zathek strike, they'll target civilian populations first to demoralize us. They'll use quantum tunneling to attack hospitals, schools, and refugee centers. They'll execute prisoners and use biological weapons against non-combatants. The intelligence officer nodded grimly. Our psychological profiles confirm this assessment. Zathek culture views mercy as weakness and honor as a liability. So we need to be prepared to fight without mercy or honor, Sarah continued. We need to think like predators instead of peacekeepers. We need to remember what humanity was before we became civilized. The Admiral turned back to face her. You're talking about war crimes, Lieutenant. I'm talking about survival, sir. The Federation will fall if we fight this war with one hand tied behind our backs. Humanity will be extinct if we refuse to become monsters when monsters come for us. The hidden figure leaned forward. What specific preparations do you recommend? Sarah's presentation shifted to detailed tactical plans that made the room's occupants lean back in their chairs. She had clearly been thinking about this for far longer than the current crisis. First, we identify and isolate potential collaborators among Federation species. This requires a complete audit of all military and civilian leadership positions. Second, we develop counter-infiltration protocols for Zathek quantum technology. Third, we establish secure human-only command structures that can operate independently of Federation oversight. You're describing the dismantling of the Federation itself, the diplomat protested. I'm describing how to save what can be saved, Sarah replied. The Federation as we know it is already dead. It died the moment our allies decided to betray us. The question now is whether humanity survives what comes next. Admiral Harrison returned to his desk and activated a secure communication channel. Priority message to Earth Command, he said. Operation Lazarus is authorized. Repeat. Operation Lazarus is authorized. Sarah showed no surprise at hearing the code phrase, but the other figures in the room exchanged glances. Operation Lazarus was humanity's deepest secret, a contingency plan for the complete breakdown of Federation cooperation. Lieutenant Chen will be transferred to Special Operations Command immediately, the Admiral announced. Her cover at the Academy is blown, but that may work to our advantage. Word of today's simulation will spread throughout the Cadet Corps. Other species will know that humanity has capabilities they didn't suspect. Is that wise? The intelligence officer asked. Showing our hand before we're ready to play it? Sometimes a demonstration of strength prevents the need for actual violence, the Admiral replied. If our potential enemies believe we're more dangerous than they thought, they might reconsider their plans. Sarah stood silently through this exchange, but her mind was already moving to the next phase of the operation. The Academy had served its purpose as an observation post, allowing her to study the psychology and capabilities of potential enemies. Now it was time for more direct action. One more thing, she said as the meeting concluded. The cadets I've been observing, some of them have potential. Velthara, Thok, even Rodriguez. If they can be trusted, they might be valuable assets in what's coming. And if they can't be trusted? The modulated voice asked. Sarah's smile was cold and predatory. Then they'll serve as examples to the others. As she left Admiral Harrison's office, Sarah passed through corridors filled with cadets from a dozen different species. They looked at her with new interest now, whispers following in her wake. The quiet girl from the back corner had revealed herself to be something far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. But they still had no idea just how dangerous she really was. That revelation would come soon enough. 3 weeks after the simulation that changed everything, the first ships began disappearing. The FSS Concordia, a heavy cruiser on patrol near the outer rim, simply vanished from sensor contact during a routine sweep of the Kepler system. No distress signal, no debris field, no trace of what had happened to 600 crew members. 2 days later, the research station at Wolf 359 went silent mid-transmission. The last message spoke of unusual energy readings before the communication cut off abruptly. Sarah stood in the Special Operations Command briefing room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the locations of 17 missing Federation assets. Around the table sat the deadliest humans in known space, operatives whose very existence was classified above most government officials' clearance levels. Pattern analysis suggests coordinated strikes, reported Commander Nash, a scarred veteran whose cybernetic arm clicked softly as he manipulated the tactical display. The targets appear random, but they're all positioned along major shipping routes. They're not random, Sarah said quietly. They're testing our response protocols. Each attack gives them data about how quickly we can mobilize forces, what kind of search patterns we use, and how our command structure reacts to crisis situations. Colonel Martinez, the unit's second in command, nodded grimly. Intelligence confirms increased Zathek fleet activity in all affected sectors. They're conducting rescue operations to search for survivors, which means they're collecting evidence and making sure no witnesses survive to report what really happened, Sarah observed. How long before they move to the next phase? Before anyone could answer, alerts began flashing across every display in the room. Priority communications flooded in from across Federation space as a coordinated assault began on 12 different worlds simultaneously. Admiral Harrison's face appeared on the main screen, his expression grim. Operation Prometheus has begun, he announced. All Special Operations units are now active. Authorization code Alpha 77 Delta. Execute your missions. The room erupted into controlled chaos as operatives grabbed equipment and headed for their assigned transports. Sarah remained at the tactical display, studying the attack patterns with cold efficiency. Chen, Colonel Martinez called out, your mission parameters just changed. Forget the reconnaissance assignment. You're now tasked with eliminating the Zathek command structure on Proxima Station. Sarah looked up from the display. How many civilians are on the station? Approximately 40,000. Mixed species including human families. Acceptable losses? Martinez paused at the question. The mission takes priority over civilian casualties. Sarah nodded and turned back to her equipment preparations. Around her, other operatives were arming themselves with conventional weapons, plasma rifles, kinetic guns, electronic warfare devices. Sarah's loadout was different. She strapped on what appeared to be a standard-issue tactical vest. But the devices integrated into its fabric were far from standard. Nanoscale manufacturing units, quantum disruption generators, and biological warfare canisters that contained horrors developed in humanity's darkest research facilities. "Question," said Agent Torres, a young operative who had joined the unit recently. "If the Zathek have quantum tunneling technology, how do we prevent them from simply disappearing when we attack?" Sarah held up a small device that looked like a communications beacon, quantum inhibitor field generator. "It creates a localized disruption that prevents quantum tunneling within a 5-kilometer radius." "Impressive," Torres commented. "Where did you get technology like that?" Sarah's smile was cold. "I designed it. Turns out that studying Zathek technical manuals has some advantages." The transport ship that carried Sarah to Proxima Station was a sleek stealth vessel designed to avoid detection by conventional sensors. As they approached the massive orbital platform, intelligence reports painted a disturbing picture of what they would find. "Station security has been completely replaced by Zathek personnel," the pilot reported. "They're claiming it's a temporary security enhancement due to recent terrorist threats. Federation Command has accepted this explanation." "How many Zathek are on board?" Sarah asked. "Intelligence estimates between 500 and 800. They've established a command center in Section 7 and are using the station's communication array to coordinate fleet movements." Sarah studied the station's schematics on her tactical display. Proxima Station was one of the Federation's largest commercial hubs, a sprawling complex of docking bays, residential areas, shopping districts, and industrial facilities. Finding and eliminating the Zathek command structure without causing massive civilian casualties would be nearly impossible using conventional tactics. Fortunately, Sarah had no intention of using conventional tactics. "Drop me at Docking Bay 47, she instructed. "It's scheduled for maintenance, so it should be empty." "What about backup?" the pilot asked. "Shouldn't you wait for additional operatives?" "This mission requires stealth, not firepower," Sarah replied. "Besides, the Zathek are expecting a military assault. They're not expecting a single person with the right tools." The docking bay was indeed empty when Sarah arrived, her stealth suit rendering her invisible to both visual and sensor detection. She moved through the station's maintenance corridors like a ghost, avoiding the main thoroughfares where civilians and Zathek security forces mingled. Her first stop was the station's central computer core. Using a combination of advanced hacking tools and her extensive knowledge of Federation systems, Sarah gained administrative access within minutes. But instead of immediately sabotaging the station's operations, she began a more subtle task. She planted viruses in the communication systems that would activate later, spreading false information throughout the Zathek fleet. She altered environmental controls in specific sections, creating conditions that would be uncomfortable for Zathek physiology, but harmless to other species. Most importantly, she began rerouting power from non-essential systems to the quantum inhibitor she would deploy later. "Phase 1 complete," she whispered into her communication device, beginning infiltration of command sector. Section 7 had been transformed into a fortress. Zathek guards patrolled every corridor, their crystalline armor gleaming under the harsh lighting they preferred. Energy barriers blocked access to sensitive areas, and automated defenses tracked every movement. Sarah studied the defenses for 30 minutes before making her move. When she finally acted, it wasn't with weapons or explosives. Instead, she released a cloud of nanomachines that were programmed to seek out and modify Zathek technology. The results were subtle at first. Communication devices began experiencing interference. Energy barriers flickered sporadically. Automated defenses started targeting each other instead of potential intruders. By the time the Zathek realized something was wrong, it was too late. Sarah had reached the command center and activated her quantum inhibitor. The Zathek officers inside found themselves trapped, unable to use their quantum tunneling abilities to escape. What happened next would never appear in any official reports. Sarah had spent months studying Zathek psychology, learning their fears and weaknesses. She used that knowledge with surgical precision, extracting information about fleet positions, attack schedules, and collaborator networks. When she was finished, the Zathek command structure on Proxima Station had been completely eliminated. But more importantly, She had gained intelligence that would allow human forces to strike back with devastating effectiveness. As emergency alarms began wailing throughout the station, Sarah made her way back to the extraction point. Behind her, the evidence of her presence was already being erased by self-destructing nanomachines and viral programs that would cover her tracks. To the station's civilian population, it would appear that the Zathek security forces had simply vanished. There would be no bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had really happened. But throughout Zathek space, fleet commanders would soon receive orders that would lead them into carefully prepared ambushes. Communication networks would begin failing at critical moments. Supply lines would be disrupted by mysterious equipment failures. The war had begun, and humanity was fighting it on their own terms. As Sarah's extraction ship departed Proxima Station, she was already planning her next mission. The Zathek had made the mistake of assuming that humans would fight like civilized beings. They were about to learn just how wrong that assumption was. The war room aboard the FSS Retribution buzzed with desperate energy as Federation commanders struggled to comprehend the scale of the betrayal. Admiral Harrison stood before a massive holographic display showing the tactical situation across 3 sectors of space. Red indicators marked lost colonies, missing fleets, and communication blackouts that painted a picture of systematic destruction. 17 worlds have gone silent in the past week, reported Commander Nash, his cybernetic implants interfacing directly with the ship's intelligence networks. Each attack followed the same pattern. Zathek forces appeared via quantum tunnel, eliminated all defensive installations, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. General Korath, a Gromax commander whose loyalty had been verified through extensive screening, pounded his massive fist on the table. My people on Kepler Prime sent one final transmission before the attack. They said the Zathek forces knew exactly where every weapons cache and shield generator was located. This was not random destruction. It was surgical elimination of our ability to resist. Sarah stood silently in the corner, watching and listening as the Federation's military leadership grappled with a new reality. These were officers who had built their careers on cooperation and diplomacy. The concept of total warfare, of an enemy that targeted civilians and ignored all conventions of civilized conflict, was alien to their thinking. "What's our fleet strength?" Admiral Harrison asked. "Down to 60% of pre-war levels," Commander Nash replied. "But that's not the worst part. Intelligence indicates that Zathek infiltrators have been feeding our fleet positions to enemy forces for months. Every major naval base, every supply depot, every strategic reserve, they know where all of it is." Admiral Harrison turned to Sarah. "Lieutenant, what's the status of Operation Shadowfall?" "Proceeding on schedule, sir," Sarah replied. Human-only strike teams have eliminated Zathek command structures on 14 different installations. We've also successfully planted false intelligence in their communication networks that should lead to at least 3 friendly fire incidents among their fleet formations. General Korath's eyes widened. "You're feeding them false information through their own networks? How is this possible?" "Zathek quantum communication relies on entangled particles," Sarah explained. "If you can duplicate the quantum signature of one of their communication nodes, you can inject false data that appears to come from legitimate sources. The process requires detailed knowledge of their encryption protocols, but those protocols assume that only Zathek technology can access their networks. They never considered that someone might reverse engineer their systems," Admiral Harrison observed. "More than that," Sarah continued, "they never considered that someone might use their technological advantages against them. Their quantum tunneling ability is powered by massive energy signatures that can be detected and tracked if you know what to look for. Their hive-mind coordination creates single points of failure that can be exploited. Their assumption of technological superiority makes them predictable." A new voice interrupted the briefing. "Predictable enough to fall into traps, it seems." Everyone turned as Velthara entered the war room, her crystalline features showing signs of stress and exhaustion. Behind her came Thok and several other former Academy cadets who had been recruited into intelligence services. Commander Velthara," Admiral Harrison said with surprise. "I thought you were assigned to the diplomatic mission on Centauri Prime." "I was," Velthara replied grimly. "Until the Zathek forces there revealed their true intentions. They executed the entire Federation diplomatic corps during what was supposed to be a peace conference. I barely escaped with classified intelligence about their broader strategy. She activated a portable display that showed star charts covered with invasion routes and timetables. The Centauri attack was just the beginning. The Zathek Collective has formed what they call the Purification Alliance, with 6 other species. Their goal isn't conquest, it's extermination. They intend to eliminate humanity entirely and divide our territories among the Alliance members. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't a war for resources or political advantage. It was genocide on an interstellar scale. How long do we have? General Korath asked. According to the intelligence I recovered, Velthera said, the final assault on Earth begins in 48 hours. They're massing forces in the Alpha Centauri system, over 2,000 ships, including those massive hive vessels that can manufacture reinforcements during battle. Admiral Harrison studied the tactical display with grim determination. We have maybe 300 ships that can reach Earth in time to defend it. Against 2,000 enemy vessels, conventional tactics won't work. No, Sarah agreed. Conventional tactics will get us all killed. But I have a different plan. She stepped forward and began manipulating the holographic display, showing ship movements and strategic positions that made the other officers lean back in their chairs. We don't fight them at Earth, she said. We make them come to us somewhere else. Somewhere we can control the battlefield. Explain, Admiral Harrison ordered. The Zathek strategy depends on quantum tunneling to achieve tactical surprise, Sarah began. But quantum tunneling requires precise calculations about spatial coordinates and gravitational fields. If you can disrupt those calculations, the technology becomes useless, or worse, it becomes a weapon against the user. She highlighted a section of space near the outer system. The asteroid belt. Specifically the region near Ceres where gravitational anomalies are strongest. We establish our defensive positions there and wait for them to tunnel in. That's suicide, Commander Nash protested. Fighting in an asteroid field limits our maneuverability and gives the enemy cover. It limits their maneuverability too, Sarah replied. More importantly, it masks the quantum disruption fields we'll deploy throughout the area. When they try to tunnel in, they'll find themselves scattered across hundreds of thousands of cubic kilometers of space, separated from their support units and unable to coordinate effectively. Velthera studied the plan with growing understanding. You're going to turn their greatest advantage into our weapon. Exactly. But that's just the beginning, Sarah continued. While they're dealing with the disruption fields, we implement Phase 2. The display shifted to show detailed schematics of Zathek hive ships. Sarah had apparently spent considerable time studying their construction and capabilities. The hive ships are the key to their entire strategy, she explained. Each one can coordinate up to 1,000 individual vessels and manufacture replacement fighters during battle. But they have a critical weakness. They're powered by massive quantum reactors that need constant cooling. She highlighted specific sections of the hive ship designs. If you can overload their cooling systems, the reactors go critical. One hive ship exploding releases enough energy to destroy everything within a 50-kilometer radius. General Korath's eyes gleamed with savage appreciation. You want to turn their command ships into bombs. I want to turn their command ships into signals, Sarah corrected. When the first hive ship explodes, it will send a message to every species in the galaxy. Humanity doesn't just fight back. We turn our enemies' strengths against them. Admiral Harrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical projections. Finally, he nodded slowly. How many ships do you need for this plan? Every vessel we can spare, Sarah replied. But more importantly, I need volunteers. This mission has a very low survival probability. How low? Velthera asked. Sarah's dark eyes met those of her former classmate. Anyone who participates in this operation should consider themselves already dead. We're not fighting to survive, we're fighting to make sure humanity's enemies pay such a high price for their victory that they'll think twice before challenging us again. The war room fell silent as the weight of her words settled over everyone present. They were discussing a suicide mission on a scale that defied comprehension. I volunteer, Velthera said without hesitation. As do I, rumbled Thok. One by one, every officer in the room stepped forward. They understood what Sarah was asking of them, and they understood why it was necessary. Humanity was about to make its final stand, and when the battle was over, The galaxy would remember why Earth's children had once been called the most dangerous species in known space. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she began issuing detailed orders. The quiet girl from the Academy's back corner was finally ready to show the universe what humans could do when they stopped pretending to be civilized. The Zathek wanted to exterminate humanity. They were about to learn that humanity had other plans. The asteroid field near Ceres had been transformed into humanity's final fortress. 300 Federation ships hung in carefully calculated positions among the tumbling rocks, their hulls darkened to avoid detection and their crews silent with the knowledge of what was coming. Sarah stood on the bridge of the FSS Retribution, watching tactical displays that showed the approach of the largest military force ever assembled in human space. 2,000 enemy vessels moved in perfect formation toward Earth, their quantum signatures burning like stars against the cosmic dark. Enemy fleet will reach optimal tunneling range in 17 minutes, reported Commander Nash from his position at the sensor station. Quantum disruption fields are active and ready. Around the bridge, officers who had once been her classmates now served as her tactical coordinators. Velthara managed fleet communications while Thok directed fighter squadrons that hung hidden among the asteroids. Even Rodriguez was there, his skills with electronic warfare proving valuable despite his earlier prejudices. "All ships report ready," Velthara announced, her crystalline voice steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. "Quantum inhibitor fields are synchronized and will activate on your command." Admiral Harrison stood beside Sarah, his weathered face showing no emotion as he watched death approach. "Lieutenant, you have tactical command. Execute your plan when ready." Sarah nodded and activated the fleet-wide communication channel. Her voice, still quiet but now carrying absolute authority, reached every ship in their desperate formation. "All vessels, this is Lieutenant Chen. In approximately 15 minutes, the largest enemy force in galactic history will attempt to quantum tunnel into this sector. When they do, they will discover that their technological advantages have become liabilities. They will find themselves scattered, confused, and vulnerable." She paused, letting her words sink in. "What happens next will be remembered for 1,000 years. Not because of our victory. Our survival probability is less than 10%. But because of the price we make them pay. Today we remind the galaxy why humanity earned its place among the stars. Today we show them what happens when predators try to hunt Earth's children." The communication channel closed. Around the bridge, officers returned to their duties with grim determination. They all knew they were likely living their last minutes. "Quantum signatures building," Nash reported. "Enemy fleet is beginning tunnel sequence. All ships stand by," Sarah commanded. "Disruption field activation in 10 seconds." She watched the tactical display as space itself began to warp around the incoming enemy fleet. The Zathek had calculated their arrival coordinates with typical precision, intending to appear in formation around Earth's orbital defenses. Instead, they would find themselves scattered throughout the asteroid field, far from their intended destination. Field activation. Now. Space twisted as thousands of quantum disruption generators activated simultaneously. The effect was like throwing sand into a precision clockwork. The enemy's quantum tunneling systems went haywire, depositing ships randomly throughout a volume of space larger than most star systems. "Direct hits," Thok roared from his fighter coordination station. Enemy vessels materializing throughout the field. They're scattered and disoriented. On the tactical display, red dots representing enemy ships appeared sporadically among the asteroids. Some materialized inside solid rock and were destroyed instantly. Others found themselves alone and far from support. A few lucky ones appeared in clear space but had no idea where they were or how to regroup. "Phase 2, Sarah commanded. "All ships execute Omega Protocol." The hidden Federation fleet erupted from concealment among the asteroids, their weapons targeting the confused enemy vessels with deadly precision. But this wasn't random combat. Every shot had been carefully planned during the weeks of preparation. Sarah's tactical genius became apparent as the battle unfolded. She had positioned her ships not just to maximize firepower, but to drive the scattered enemy vessels toward specific areas of the asteroid field, areas where the massive Zathek hive ships would attempt to materialize. "Hive ship contact," Nash announced. "Massive quantum signature forming at coordinate 77 Mark II. "All fighters converge on those coordinates," Sarah ordered. "Begin Phase 3. What emerged from quantum space was a mountain of crystalline metal and organic technology, a hive ship over 20 kilometers long that dwarfed every other vessel in the field. Its appearance should have been terrifying. Instead, it was exactly what Sarah had been waiting for. "Cooling system targeting package uploaded to all fighters," she announced calmly. "Begin surgical strikes on thermal regulation nodes." Thox fighters swarmed over the massive vessel like angry insects, their precise attacks targeting specific components that Sarah had identified during her months of studying Zathek technology. They weren't trying to destroy the hive ship, they were trying to make it destroy itself. "Primary cooling system offline," reported one of the fighter pilots. "Internal temperature rising rapidly." "Secondary cooling system breached," called another. "They're trying to emergency vent their reactors." "Not today," Sarah said softly, activating a special communications frequency. "Implement viral package Delta 7. Across the hive ship's hull, hidden nanomachines that had been planted during earlier infiltration missions activated simultaneously. They sealed the emergency vents, blocked the cooling intakes, and overrode the safety systems that might have prevented catastrophe. The explosion, when it came, lit up the entire asteroid field like a newborn star. The hive ship's quantum reactors went critical in a cascade failure that released more energy than most stellar phenomena. The blast wave vaporized asteroids for hundreds of kilometers in every direction and destroyed dozens of enemy vessels that had been attempting to regroup. More importantly, it sent a message, "Second hive ship emerging," Nash called out. "They're trying to establish a command perimeter." "Let them," Sarah replied. "Fighters execute the same targeting pattern. Show them that this wasn't luck." The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for centuries. Against impossible odds, Sarah's tactics systematically dismantled the enemy fleet. Each hive ship that tried to establish control was turned into a massive bomb. Scattered enemy vessels found themselves facing coordinated attacks from ships that seemed to appear from nowhere. But the cost was devastating. Federation ships died in dozens, their crews sacrificing themselves to maintain the tactical advantage. The FSS Concordia rammed an enemy battleship to prevent it from reaching the third hive ship. The destroyer squadron, led by Rodriguez, held their position against overwhelming odds until their ships were reduced to expanding clouds of plasma. Fleet strength down to 30%, Commander Nash reported, his voice tight with pain from wounds sustained when debris breached the bridge. "We can't maintain this much longer." Sarah studied the tactical display with cold calculation. 3 hive ships destroyed, but more were coming. The enemy fleet was adapting to her tactics, learning to avoid the traps she had set. "All remaining ships," she announced over the communication channel, "implement final protocol." This is not a request. Around the bridge, officers who understood what she meant looked at her with something approaching awe. Final protocol was a last resort tactic that turned every Federation ship into a guided missile aimed at enemy command vessels. "Sarah," Velthera said quietly, "there might be another way." "There is no other way," Sarah replied. "But there is a better way to die." She turned to Admiral Harrison, her dark eyes showing the same calm certainty that had marked her academy days. "Sir, recommend immediate evacuation to the escape pods. This bridge will be the primary target for the final assault." The Admiral shook his head. "I've served on this ship for 15 years, Lieutenant. I'm not leaving her now." One by one, the other officers made the same choice. They would see this through to the end. "All ships," Sarah commanded, "coordinate final strike on remaining hive vessels. Make every shot count." What happened next defied every rule of space combat. Federation ships, many of them damaged and running on emergency power, launched coordinated attacks that turned the remaining enemy command vessels into expanding spheres of destruction. The combination of Sarah's tactical genius and humanity's refusal to surrender created a battle that would be remembered as the moment when Earth's children proved they would never be cattle. When the explosions finally died away, less than 50 Federation ships remained operational. Of the massive enemy fleet that had come to exterminate humanity, scattered survivors fled in panic toward the outer system. Sarah stood amid the wreckage of the bridge, surrounded by displays showing the tactical aftermath of the most destructive space battle in galactic history. The immediate threat was over, but she knew this was only the beginning. "Admiral," she said quietly, "recommend immediate dispatch of the recorded battle data to all Federation worlds and neutral systems." The galaxy needs to see what happened here. Admiral Harrison, bleeding from a dozen wounds but still standing, nodded with fierce pride. The galaxy will know, Lieutenant. They'll know that humanity doesn't go quietly into extinction. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she looked out at the debris field that had once been the greatest military force ever assembled.